There could be many things that's holding your guitar playing back, and especially when you're in the intermediate level of guitar playing. And today I wanted to discuss something I've been seeing quite a lot over the last few years teaching different students. And I actually believe that it could be significantly holding your playing back and preventing you from becoming a more advanced pro level player. And it does have to do exactly with your fingers, specifically knowing what finger to use at what time for different shapes and runs and licks and scale shapes and all the different things. So that's what we're gonna be diving into today. It's some of my philosophy, especially if you're more of a beginner and intermediate player, around knowing what finger you should use for different things to make playing guitar as easy as possible. And I promise this really can hold you back and make you not become the guitar player that you've always wanted to be. The first thing I often see, and this really makes players a lot more sloppy than they really are, if that makes sense. So I see a lot of the time with students, and I get asked this like all the time, which is crazy, but it's like we'll be going over something in the lesson, and they're wondering exactly what finger am I using, or they're like, hey, I do this, but is this the wrong fingering? Should I be using different fingers and stuff like that? It's a nuanced thing that I teach beginner and intermediate players much differently than I teach a more advanced pro level player, because there's the right way overall that the advanced pro player does and follows that is not necessarily the most helpful for a beginner to intermediate player. And so we're gonna be diving into that today. But what I see often is guys will be playing licks and solos, and I can almost see a hesitation. And I don't know if they're thinking about it, if there's just a muscle memorization hesitation, but I can see them almost debating what finger they should use for different things. And in that moment, sometimes they use a certain finger, another time they use a different finger, and it makes them sloppy. I even see this with the picking hand sometimes. I'm not going to dive into that today, but there's sometimes guys don't have a locked-in picking mechanic, and so with different things, different days, they'll be using an upstroke for something, a downstroke, and sometimes missing different things, and so they don't really have a locked-in, rigid approach that they really need to in order to progress into the next levels of playing guitar. For example, here is a common one kind of fingering problem a lot of guys have with the pentatonic scale. Had to switch to the Strat. The Les Paul is a half step down right now, so this isn't standard. But let's go to A minor pentatonic. And I want to particularly look at the first four notes of the A minor pentatonic, and not just the notes, but this is a common kind of sequence we see within the pentatonic scale, and that's this A to C, in this case, the 5/8, the 5/7. So the minor third shape, and then we go to the next string and play a whole step apart, right? And then debate is, what finger do you use for this C note in this case? And in different zones of the fretboard, so if we jump up an octave, we see the same shape. This would be in position 2 of the minor pentatonic. This is D string 7, 10, that's AC, and then G string 7, 9. We see the same thing, we see it an octave up again, on the B string 10th fret to 13, and then high E 10 to 12. Same sequence, same notes, same everything. A lot of times, students will ask, what's the right fingering? Should I use my ring finger for both notes and go something like this? Right? Right, and for example, if we're going over a lick in that zone, say we're in position 3, you might see me do something like that, which is position 3, A minor pentatonic, and I'm using my ring finger right there. And then I'm using my middle finger on the G note here on the 12th fret. But wait, now I'm using the ring finger on the G string. Then other times you might see me using my pinky right there. You know, so what is it? Should it be the ring finger? Should it be the pinky? Should it be middle finger for whatever reason? These are common questions that a lot of intermediate players ask, and they're fantastic questions. And in a few minutes, I'm going to walk through 2 different ways of playing all 5 pentatonic shapes, and I'm not going to walk through every note by note, but I want to do it for you can watch my fingerings and notice how different contexts, I use different fingers for different things. Some are very similar, some change. And that's really what it comes down when you get to the more advanced pro level thing. There's not like one way that you always do only this way. What happens is it gets more contextual, more circumstantial. And so what you did before and what you plan to do after dictate what you're going to use fingering wise to get and make guitar playing as easy as possible. But if you're a beginner or intermediate player, that's too much going on. That's too much thought of this finger, that finger, and it makes you sloppy and it holds you back. So in a second, when I run through the pentatonic scale, this is the fingering I do in these contexts, and this is what I would recommend you practice. And if you're an intermediate player, be very rigid and locked in with your fingerings. Don't see Slash use this fingering, and then Eddie Van Halen used this one, Stevie Ray Vaughan did this, then you watch whoever, right? Guthrie Govan did this, and every day you're trying the same ideas, but with different fingerings, and now you're causing muscle memorization problems, you're causing speed problems because you're just gonna be sloppy because your hands are not gonna know what the right thing is. So if you're in that intermediate zone and you wanna push through to the advanced pro level, sit down for a second, try to stop your mind from running around with different possible fingerings. Choose which one feels most comfortable for you and remember that and muscle memorize that. And whenever you catch yourself in this kind of zone of, should I use this finger or that finger in this circumstance, just go back to what you already decided until you're pushing through to that advanced phase, and then you'll open up to a more kind of strategic zone where sometimes you might use your middle finger, sometimes you might use a ring finger, might be the pinky. At different times, different things happen. But if you're not ready for that, please don't jump into that because you're literally going to have your hands like, should it be the ring finger there for both strings? Should it be the pinky and ring? Should it be the ring and middle on the height? Right? There's so many possible fingering options for different things. And when you're in that beginner intermediate phase, it's a problem. So real quick, I'm going to slowly walk through the pentatonic scale, all 5 positions. That's very important. Watch my fingerings. I'm going to do it 2 different ways. I'm going to do down up positional of each position, and then I'm going to do this connected way. And each time there's some things that are similar fingering wise, and then sometimes there's some notes that change, and it's because of the circumstance around me playing that. And this is the fingering I'd recommend you practice with the pentatonics, and I'm going to go through each one. So slow the video down and kind of analyze if you were trying to figure out what fingerings I use. Now, obviously, there's other situations that I use different fingerings, but my go-to fingerings is going to be this, and I highly recommend if you want to follow this kind of approach, lock this down, be rigid with this. Don't try to test new fingerings later on. Get this fully muscle memorized, and as you get to the advanced pro level, you can start seeing the circumstances around using different fingerings. All right, so I'm going to do up and down one position at a time, starting A minor, just A minor pentatonic. So here's position 1. I'm going to do position 5 down here as well because it changes. All right, so that's just up and down how I approach it. Now I'm going to do this connected up and down approach. You'll see it's slightly different, and I use slightly different fingers at different times. I'm not going to get into all the different fingerings. Just watch this back, and this is the way I would highly recommend you muscle memorize and be very rigid with these fingerings for right now. All right, so slow that down, watch it back. That's my basic recommendations. If you're a beginner or intermediate player, use those fingerings. At least personally, I found those to be the best to start off. Lock into that. When you're running into different licks and stuff like that, try to follow whatever those, once you kind of dive into those different fingerings. Now let's move on to the major scale. Hopefully, if you're an in the intermediate phase of guitar playing, you're diving into the major scale, learning that across the fretboard, and there's a kind of a simple guideline I want you to look over. Now, I do the 3-note string major scale shapes. There's other fingerings. This still kind of applies to the different ways of playing the major scale shapes, but particularly the 3-note string version. So we're gonna look at C major, 8, 10, 12 here in the low E. And there's a certain guideline with the 3-note string major scale shapes that I always follow, especially starting off. I break this at times, but starting off, follow this rigidly. The first note of, because it's 3-note string, there's gonna be 3 notes. Your first note of each shape is gonna be the index finger. That's pretty obvious, but just, I wanted to say that. And then the last note, the third note, is always gonna be the pinky. Right there. So we walk a cell shape, always gonna have the index finger and pinky. Now the problem comes in sometimes with the middle or ring. Now this usually only happens on the whole step shape that you see right here. Because this is the one that a lot of guys most guys probably naturally have a tendency to use the middle finger. But guys like Paul Gilbert will use the ring finger actually. For that whole step 8, 10, 12. Now the other ones, like so on 9, 10, 12 on the D string, it's kind of obvious to use the middle finger. And then up here, like on the 10, 12, 13 on the B string, it's pretty obvious to use the ring finger. But on that whole step shape, it's not so obvious. But typically, most guys prefer the middle finger. I prefer the middle finger. I like to do both sometimes, but I prefer the middle finger. So whatever comes first naturally for you for that shape, stick with it, be rigid. Don't let yourself do anything else until you get a little bit more closer to the advanced level, and then you'll start kind of making sense of using the other finger. Because it's still good to get strong at this, even if you prioritize the middle finger. So that's the guideline. Always have the pinky though. We're not gonna right now. In the intermediate phase, I want you always using the pinky. Don't use the ring finger. You have a tendency to kind of want to do this. And that works, right? And we'll do that. But I'd prefer you always use the pinky. And there will be instances later on that we don't do that. We save the pinky and we use the ring finger instead for that third note. But right now, always use the pinky. So no matter what it is, use the pinky. So I hope that makes sense and kind of covers this concept. Please don't try to change and build speed and all that without those fingerings being fully decided. There needs to be no hesitation, no thought of, wait, what if I use that finger? What if I use this finger? That's going to slow you down. And it's going to make you really, really sloppy, and you're never going to progress to that more pro level of playing. All right, I hope this video really helps you out. Be patient with it, and I really think you taking this as an intermediate player will help you advance very, very quickly to the next levels of guitar playing. All right, thank you guys so much. I'll see you next time.